So, apologies to our long term listeners for the much longer than anticipated hiatus that we ended up on. So much has been happening in federal politics that it became next to impossible to keep up with it all. And so much was happening behind the scenes, both for the Democrats and for me personally, that keeping a regular podcasting schedule also became impossible. However, thankfully, the stars have aligned, the ducks are in a row, and we can now resume podcasting. For those of you joining us on YouTube, you will see that we have a new format in which you can put faces to voices at long last and not be hypnotized by a waveform. And we've also added to our roster of co hosts. So, friend of the pod, Heath McKenzie, will be joining me today to discuss all things Victoria as this Victorian state election looms and the Australian Democrats' Victorian division fight for the right to be on the ballot. So, we've kept you waiting long enough. Let's get into it. Heath and I pay our respects to the traditional custodians, the lands upon which we recorded this episode, and their elders, past and present. Sovereignty never ceded. Oh, Heath, hello. Welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. Good to be back. It's been a while, and plenty's been happening in the background.
So much has been happening. As I sort of said in the intro, so much has happened in politics, so much has happened in my personal life, so much has happened in your personal life, so much has happened in the Democrats' life. Where do we start? One thing I did want to talk about to bring everybody back up to speed, and we can't begin to unpack everything that's happened in politics over the last 12 months, so we'll just take it all as read. But one of the things that has kept us off the pod for a while has been a strategic review that the party undertook last year, just to take stock of things, take stock of the political environment, take stock of where we sat and all of that. And I figured in the new and improved, revamped, you now have talking heads on your pod that we're doing. I thought that might be a really good starting point to just bring everybody back up to speed on where we're up to, what's going on, before we get into all the really, really juicy stuff we have planned. So,
Yeah, so I mean, behind the scenes, there's been a big push, obviously. Most visibly to the members would see the big push in Victoria, but I guess behind the scenes, there's been a significant bit of work that a whole lot of volunteers have been doing around the strategic review, or a bit of a strategic direction for the party over the next, I guess, decade or so. It's quite it's a document that looks a long way forward, but really important bit of work when you're running or involved in an organisation, any sort of organisation, but a political organisation like the Australian Democrats. It's easy just to kind of get stuck in the here and now and just be just trying to get whatever you can and, just push. And it was long overdue for us to sit back and go, okay, how are we going to approach our ultimate goal of getting back into the parliament, and that is, central to all of our efforts. I mean, as much as we love advocating for issues and being vocal and all the other things that come with being outside the parliament, we know that we are best when we've got a seat at the table. So that was obviously central to the bit of work, but behind that is, okay, how do we do that, and what exactly are we aiming for? So even things like, historically we've been an upper house party. We needed to unpack that and say, is that still the best place for us to be, and therefore is that where we should be targeting? And the outcome of the discussions, but we are an upper house party, and that makes a lot of sense. Who's our demographic? What's our, even, like I touched on, we love advocating, but we want to be back in parliament. We even looked at, okay, should we be back in parliament? Are we best just to be an advocacy group, a lobby group, something like that? And it was really good to kind of have the discussions amongst a large group of people, and it was a very transparent process. But the outcome is, we've got a really clear picture now of where we're headed and why. Not just, okay, let's just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. It's not a rudderless exercise. We're really all about actually getting positive outcomes and getting back into parliament.
it was incredible, actually. Yeah, it was a very in depth, very time consuming, and sort of mentally and emotionally exhausting sort of process, but it was so valuable, and particularly the engagement from our members. In the process, because obviously they were consulted, they took part in surveys, and they took part in the live sort of workshops that we had, to nut through all this stuff and work out, um, yeah, like where do we fit in the Australian political landscape, and where the resources that we have available to us, because obviously we are 100% volunteer led. We don't have mining billionaires giving us free planes and bankrolling us, and our president Leone is definitely not attending Italian fashion shows. In her spare time, sadly, she's busy, pushing for the Democrats to return to Parliament. So, it was a really, really valuable exercise, I think, for everybody to understand the political reality that we're operating in, and the enormous hurdles that we're going to need to overcome to return the Democrats to Parliament, and be able to advocate in the space where laws are made, for the issues that they're passionate about. And it was really it was deeply clarifying in terms of the challenges that we face, and the enormous hurdles that we need to overcome. But also, I think it really gave the party and everybody involved in it a really clear understanding of, the goals that we're working toward, and a common purpose. And it was an extraordinary process, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. So
Yeah. It's
yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it, that, even when we talk about something that comes up obviously when you're talking to members or the general public, and they say, have you got lower house candidates? And even, when we talk about being a small organisation, sometimes it's not about what you're doing, it's about what you're not doing. And
Mm,
there was a real conscious decision to say, okay, we need to be quite disciplined here and say, with our limited resources, be that money, volunteers, collateral like core flutes and flyers and things like that, we have to be very targeted and very disciplined around, okay, what are we targeting? And so, for instance, geographically, the decision was made because Victoria is where we are currently at our strongest. We have the
mm,
largest membership base, but also a really engaged and activated volunteer base. And so the decision was made, okay, in the short term, we have to really be clear that, we have to direct, a good chunk of our resources at Victoria, because we
mm,
have a better chance of being elected, and that, of the if we're successful in Victoria, the flow on effect is obviously we will be successful elsewhere. But
mm,
so it's when people say to us, why aren't you doing it? It's important for people to understand there's a reason why we don't do that. If we just go spreading ourselves too thin, and putting our hat in the ring in too many, whether that's a by-election or the lower house, or we'll touch on the state election soon, or local
mm,
council, whatever it is, we've got to be we've got to have that discipline, and that direction, or that sense of direction of going, okay, here's why we're doing what we're doing, but here's also why we're not doing the things that people think we should do, which seem to make sense from the outside. You go, okay, why wouldn't you throw your hat in the ring? But there's a huge fee often associated with that. There's
mm,
and you don't want to just run for the sake of it. You want to put your best foot forward, and that's finding candidates, and then obviously those candidates and all the volunteers having the time and energy to put behind running a good show. So even things like that, it was just good to vocalize those and workshop them, and the outcome is obviously we have a really clear sense of a clear sense of what our priorities are and where we're headed, which is great.
oh god, yeah. And because I think the general public especially aren't always aware of just how expensive it is to contest an election, and not just expensive in terms of money, but expensive in terms of people's time, boots on the ground, focus and attention, and the significant barriers that small parties like us face, particularly those who are not currently in Parliament, don't have the attention of the media and the press gallery to get their message across, and that sort of thing. And so it really did sort of clarify for ourselves, um, the need to be strategic about our, and like you mentioned earlier, that you said that this is a plan for the next 10 years, and you weren't kidding. Like it really, it really is like a 10 or 12-year plan to, to return the Democrats to the Parliament in at least one state, and then from there that hopefully will then open the floodgates, and we get other people elected elsewhere. But in order to achieve that first, almost insurmountable hurdle, we have to make sacrifices elsewhere. And the analysis that uh, um, God, I've forgotten Mark's
Mark
name.
Fletcher.
Thank you. Yes, yes. So Mark Fletcher is a research analyst by trade, and he volunteered his time to do the research and analysis for this particular project for us. And one of his findings was that if we went like a scattergun approach, ran candidates in every state and territory, invested a huge amount of time and money across the nation, to try and sort of get the party brand awareness up and that sort of thing. He said, well, you're in a hiding to nothing. You're going to get nowhere doing that. You're much better off focusing your time and attention and things on one achievable outcome. And then from there, build on. And so that was I think, a tough conversation for the party to have, but also, again, evidence informed, very logical, very practical. And it fit who we are as a party, and it'll hopefully bear fruit sooner rather than later for us. So, yeah, so that kept us off. That took up a lot of people's time and kept us off doing other projects like the pod. So it's very exciting that we're now back on the pod and can talk about all things politics and all things Democrats. So you, as well as being my getting added to the roster of our co-hosts for the pod, which I'm sure was the peak of your Democrats career. Let's forget about your candidacy. Uh, but you've also become the state vice president, Victoria.
I have, yeah. So it's it's funny, the candidacy bit, as much as that, externally, that's probably where, I guess when people look at it, they probably go, okay, that's my role, is being a candidate. But really, it's that's condensed into a very short space of time around elections, where being a candidate is the focus, but the rest of the time is obviously things like, it's these administrative duties, that are behind behind the scenes. So we've got a really good team. Obviously, Leonie Green, who was our state president here in Victoria, became or took over as national president after Lynn Allison stepped down, and that's fantastic. I mean, we all love Leonie. She's just a very wise head, and also, the strategic stuff we're talking about is driven from, from her, kind of her identity is all about, not just doing things for the sake of doing things. So everything's got to be done with purpose. And, she's also a very compassionate and very thoughtful person as well, and has galvanized the team and energized everyone. So we were stoked with that. And then obviously we had to fill that role of president, and I'm ecstatic to say that Ryan Paris was able to do that, who stepped away briefly from the party while he and his partner had a young child. So, and he's now, things have returned to normality somewhat, and he's now come back, and it's just been a breath of fresh air having him back and involved, and we're kicking goals, and like we said in the earlier bit about the strategic work, the decision was made to focus on Victoria. And of course, with a state election coming up in, what are we, 3 months, I think? Something like 3 months' time. That is our focus. Now, the problem being, Elana, is that whilst we are registered at a federal level, we're registered with the Australian Electoral Commission. We're not registered. I don't believe we're registered at any state level at the moment. Maybe WA, we ran in some local, but I think that was only as an independent, wasn't it? So yeah, we're not.
We couldn't. We couldn't achieve state registration in WA in time for the WA state election last year, which was deeply frustrating. And I think, again, this is probably something that not everyone's aware of, but in order to contest elections, whether it be at federal or state level, you have to be registered to do that. So we can contest federal elections because we're registered federally, but to contest state elections, we have to go through a separate registration process, which we will get into in Victoria in depth in a second.
Oh, don't worry. That's my life at the moment, is that process. It is it's what's keeping us awake at the moment. It is laborious, and it's continually made more difficult. Obviously, the major parties, and we've seen this we've seen this in recent days, where they shift the goalposts in all manner of ways to make it easier on incumbents, but usually it's to make it easier for the major parties, or to reduce the competition, I guess. They really don't want They don't want us pesky minor parties or independents popping up and stealing seats or taking away their votes. So, for instance, in Victoria at the moment, the rules that we're attempting to circumnavigate at the moment, or not circumnavigate, that we're trying to stick
Navigate.
to in order to get registered. But the current rules are that you need 500 confirmed members in Victoria to become a party, and we're going through that auditing phase from the Victorian Electoral Commission at the moment. Now, the issue with that is you really need over 1,000 members in order to get 500 confirmations, because the VEC at the moment are sending out letters to our members. So we provide them with a spreadsheet with a whole lot of names of our members, names, phone numbers, addresses, all the rest of it. And that information goes to the VEC. They check them off. It's got to match the electoral roll. So if Elana, if you were in Victoria and you signed up as a member and you gave us an address, but you were still enrolled to vote at a different address, well, then they won't accept that. They won't send the letter. Then once the letter goes out, we're relying on people checking their mailbox, which of course many people, I've heard from people who are working interstate or they're traveling, so they're not necessarily getting their mail. But even people who are at home, often they don't check their mail because snail mail, obviously, is not the most common thing these days. So we're finding that we've got to get people to somehow get the letter, and a lot of the letters, they haven't even reached their destination. Then they've got to get the letter, they've got to fill it out and post it back, or they've got to take a photo of it and email it back. And they have thankfully given us the option to call the VEC during business hours. So members can, once they've received the letter, they can ring up and say, "Hey, this is my name. I am a member. You can sign me off," which has been a godsend, because that's probably, so we're currently sitting at around 300, somewhere between 350 and 400 confirmations,
Wow.
which is fantastic. And we've still got another week or two of the original batch that we gave them, but fortunately they've given us the opportunity to provide a supplementary list. Now, amazingly, in Victoria, I think we've near on tripled our membership in the last, I reckon, 3 or 4 months, which has just been amazing. We've been getting really good social media traction. Our viewership numbers on social media are through the roof compared to sort of this time last year or even 6 months ago. We've got a really active social media team that are just putting heaps of content out there, and it's being really well received. And we've had some good engagements with different influencers. So it's been an amazing time. And of course, off the back of that, we've been able to drive this membership growth in Victoria. And so, because we got a whole lot of members in after we'd sent the original list, they've allowed us to send them through. So I think we've got another 300 names going to the VEC. And I think we've sent it through. Their letters are going out tomorrow, I believe. So, so then we've got this opportunity to get over the line. So we're either going to just get there or just miss out. But it's incredible when you've got 1,000 names to hand them. That it's a real battle just to get 500 returns. But we knew this was going to be a difficult process. But it's I tell you what, they make you work for it. Of course, it used to be a much lower number that you had to get, but the majors have really driven that number up because they know it's an inhibitor. And I get you don't want a ballot paper that has 100 different entries on there, so because it becomes a little bit difficult. And you've got things like the Free Palestine Party and things like that are not what they say they are. It's Avi Yemeni, putting in false, a party under a false name. I guess it's just feeding preferences through to one nation. So you don't want these organisations to have a clear, easy road onto the ballot paper. So there has to be, a hurdle to jump. But at the level it's at now just makes it so prohibitive to get going. Particularly when we're, as I say, we've been registered nationally. We've run in every federal election for the last 50 years, except one where we, I think, briefly lost registration, had to run as independents. Yeah. But even in that, it's just so incredibly difficult to go through this process. And of course, if we're fortunate enough to get registered, that's only the start, because 2 months after we get advised of that, we've then got to go and hit the ground running and run a campaign.
This is it,
which is, and we'll touch on it in a moment, but of course that the whole campaign's been made a whole lot harder in the last couple of days as well.
Oh God, yeah, and the whole I guess burden of registration is, I mean, again, I agree with you completely. You want to have serious players contesting elections. You know, Australia doesn't really have, I guess, the tradition of sort of novelty or comedy candidates the way Britain does, and we're seeing playing out with the by election that Nigel Farage has triggered. But also, you know, like you said, it does give the incumbent parties, particularly the parties that control the electoral act in each state and the federal electoral act, to, you know, raise the barriers so high that it sort of consolidates power for those incumbents, and ensures that there are no challenges, you know, to that. And sort of entrenches the two-party system, which in the current environment where the two-party system is anathema to so many people, really, you know, we've had a lot of support on social media, a lot of people asking us, you know, are you running in the November election? And our social media team have had to go, we will, if we can get registered.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
that's the
it's
first hurdle, you know.
oh yeah, and that's like that's our ultimate. Oh, it's not our ultimate goal, but that's our immediate goal is, of course, to
Mm.
get registered so we can contest the election. And I think, you know, I get a lot of questions because I've been a candidate, obviously before. You know, a lot of friends and you know, other people who I see in the street sort of say to me, you know, are you running? And I say, well, yeah, we're trying to get registered. You know, this is this is the process we're having to go through at the moment. You know, I think we've made something like 800 phone calls already, and we've got a few
Wow.
hundred phone calls to go, and that, you know, plus the follow-up texts and the emails and everything else. But all of this is just to get on the ballot paper, and then, if you know, the importance of running in this particular election is in this state election can't be overlooked, because it
Mm.
is you know, federally and every state around Australia, and indeed every country around the world, everyone's got their issues. It is a dynamic, ever-changing world that we live in, and you know, you know, whether it's environmental or technological or you know, social issues, whatever it is, you know, health issues. Every different jurisdiction has their fair share of issues, but in Victoria, we're pretty stuffed. You know, there's a lot of good stuff about Victoria, but there's a lot of division. There is still a lot of scarring from the time of the pandemic, and of course, that's resulted
Mm.
in, you know, any number of cookers who have, you know, surfaced and are becoming more and more vocal. But there's also legitimate anger and frustration out there, whether that's relating to how hard it is to run small businesses in Victoria, you know, off the back of the pandemic, but also just, you know, we're heavily taxed, and you know, it's incredibly difficult to operate in that environment. And then, of course, we've got just what would seemingly be clear evidence that there has been a pretty significant or very significant level of corruption and incompetence to do with the infrastructure projects that are, I mean, they're just massive. I spoke to a member the other day, and he said, look, I can't talk. I'm standing out the front of my place and I could hardly hear, because he's right out the front of Northeast Link, which is one of the largest projects I've ever witnessed in my life. Like, you drive through there and it's just incredible, and it comes at a cost. And then we've got Suburban Rail Loop. We've just finished the metro. You know, we're talking about airport rail now. You know, there are just significant projects going on. All, you know, I've got 2 level crossings being removed right near my place here, down in sort of the southeastern Bayside suburbs. It's state changing. You know, it is
Mm.
really significant infrastructure that's going in. The cost is significant. I think we're up to about $200 billion in net debt as a state, which, you know, is not, it's not insurmountable, but it's not the end of the world, right? Like, it's
Mm.
manageable to a degree. The interest payments are going up, and that's becoming pretty horrendous. But when people are, you know, the figure that's been thrown around is like $15 billion that's gone to, you know, criminals or criminal organisations. Now, to me, I can't get my head around that figure. But even if it's 1 billion, even if it's 50 million, like, it's kind of like, as soon as you're talking in millions, let alone billions, if you're talking in millions, that's gone to criminal organisations and in a way that's not being stolen, it's kind of been done through the books almost, right? Like
Mm. Sort of
it's been
siphoned
done
off.
by heavy-handed, standover tactics and security
Mm.
firms and union bullying and all these different things. Uh, Whether it's the eye-watering, quite staggering sum of 15 billion, or whether it's significantly less than that, there is a huge wave of frustration and anger, disappointment. You can throw any other emotion towards it, um, and that's really bubbling to the surface. It's not going to be a pleasant election. It's going to
Mm.
be on for young and old. There's going to be a lot of anger in the polling booths. There's hence the rise of One Nation, because a lot of people are now looking to cast a protest vote, which we can touch on later. But I probably don't agree necessarily with that. That placement of the protest vote in that particular camp, but you can understand the feeling of resentment and disenchantment that's coming from the voter base at the moment, because it is really it's really stuffed, and hence why the Australian Democrats are seeking to run in that one, because the essence of this, at the heart of this, what is required is oversight, accountability, and due process, which is obviously what we've been harping on about for 49 and a half years now.
Exactly. And look, I mean, obviously I'm an outsider to Victoria because I'm in WA, but from an outsider's perspective, it really is almost a perfect storm there, because you have a aging government. They're seeking their fourth term. You have a in, well, incompetence probably too strong a word, but an opposition that is in disarray. Like the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party, as it has done in almost every state and territory, has collapsed in Victoria. So they've had their own travails. The opposition leader, to my understanding, is a first-term MP, which is unheard of.
Mm,
Like you're in dire straits when you have to, tap a first-term MP on the shoulder to lead the party, and put her hand up to be, prospective premier.
mm,
You have the scandals and the corruption surrounding the big build, and 8 years ago the big build was an election winner for the Andrews government. It was an extraordinary sort of state building, forward thinking, building for the future kind of project, and now it's sort of coming crashing down around everyone's ears. And as you said, and that's outside of the societal and the collective trauma that Victoria is still processing post pandemic, and that sort of stuff. And then on top of all of that, you have the fact that the world's on fire. We're openly speculating about watching the season finale of the United States and everything else that's going on. It's a lot.
yeah.
So as much as we are, as a party, I think, a little bit exhausted, a little bit frustrated with the challenges and the hurdles that we have to overcome just to
Mm,
partake in our democracy. The actual election itself, as you said, is going to be absolutely huge, and
yeah.
the whole country is watching this with great interest, and I think bated breath to see how it all plays out, because it's kind of the canary in the coal mine for the state of the nation as a whole.
Mm,
Particularly, I think, because Victoria historically has always been seen as the most progressive state in Australia. So if One Nation does do well in the election, that says a lot.
mm. Oh yeah,
So
and look, I think uh, they will do well. Compared to their historical performance. Like that, it
yeah.
is without doubt that they will improve significantly on what they have done previously in state elections. And when the next general election comes federally, they will see a big uptick in their vote numbers. Now, what remains to be seen is whether that transpires, or whether that transcends into extra seats. Now, upper house seats, absolutely.
Mm.
Lower house seats, I'm still not super confident that when people go to vote, they're going to vote for someone who they've never really heard of. A lot of even in Victoria, you've got, I think, 88 lower house seats. Now that's when you've also got to find a handful of people for the upper house as well. Um, that's a lot of people for One Nation to go and find to not just run, but they've got to have a microphone in front of them,
Mm.
and they don't have a great track record with finding people who can hold the crazy and long enough to be an attractive proposition to the electorate.
Yeah.
And we've already seen it. And Barnaby Joyce is sort of the chief apologist for the party at the moment. I think that's probably why there's rumours abound that he will bail, because he's just sick of apologising for these for these clowns that just whether or not they're just singing from their own hymn sheet, not the party hymn sheet, and it is very hard for an organisation. We've spoken about how hard it is for us at our level, but One Nation, there's growing pains, right?
Mm.
And this is what they're encountering. To find that many candidates to run in these lower house seats, and then you've got to factor in that when people go to vote, they're looking at that person going, well, hang on, I've never seen this person. I've seen the other people. I've seen whether it's the Labor, Liberal, the National. It might be a high-profile independent. It might be, someone else that they respect in the community. It might be a high-profile person that's running for the Greens, for instance, that's had a lot to do in their community. But when they've seen people with a track record in their electorate, and then they're seeing a One Nation candidate that's been plucked from potentially outside the electorate or just plucked from obscurity and placed in front of them, I think a lot of people will struggle to go, oh, okay, yes, this is a protest vote, but I want to vote for the orange mob, but I can't vote for that person, based on what they've just said in the media. And I think that's what's going to hold them back. But they'll still do really well.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, compared to the historic sort of performance, that I think it's a given that they will do better. Because Samaras, who runs Redbridge polling, was talking about the fact that polling, because everyone's focused on polling, and he, as a polling professional, gets frustrated because they'll say, oh, One Nation is polling at 30% in X poll, and then it gets extrapolated across the nation as
Yeah.
that's the support for One Nation if an election was held today. And it's not really the case. He said that polling is literally, it is a snapshot in time.
Hmm.
And the key thing that it does not take into account is if an election was held today, and if you, standing in the voting booth, had to decide who it was who was going to run your state for you in the case of Victoria, or the country in the case of a federal election, do you actually want it to be One Nation? And that's the question that has not yet been answered by anybody.
Hmm.
Because in South Australia, it was answered in the negative because Peter Malinauskas absolutely rocked it
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
and it was the Liberal Party continued to suffer its extraordinary decline in South Australia. And in Farrer, that was just a by-election for a federal seat, so that had no bearing whatsoever on the government because the government didn't run in that seat. Labor didn't field a candidate. It was literally down to the coalition versus One Nation. And based on the coalition's performance and the fact that that by-election had been called because they had brutally assassinated their first female
Hmm.
leader, you can understand why One Nation took that particular seat. So yeah, as a political nerd, I'm really, really keen, not keen to see see how it turns out. Victoria, I'm quite anxious, but I'm deeply interested in watching the Victorian election and
Oh,
seeing how it, because at the moment it's anybody's guess. Like it's everything is so up in the air because you have, it is this weird confluence of a weak government that's aging and not very popular and is beset by scandal. They've had their third premier in a term, I guess. Um, you have a weak opposition, and then you have this insurgency in One Nation coming in from the far right. And it's a set of circumstances that I don't think we've ever seen in Australian politics before, certainly not within recent memory. And so it really is anybody's guess as to how it all will, sort of fold out.
yeah.
Um, it's
Yeah, I
yeah,
think. Look, and you touched on it there. Like it's, keen to see. It's not the right term, but it's like it's a bit like Trump over in the States in the sense that, it's the car crash, right?
mm,
Everyone slows down to have a look. It's macabre of us, but you kind of, it's what gets eyeballs, and that is why One Nation are being, that's why they are, kind of getting traction, is that they say the things that get the clicks, right? And there's a whole
yeah,
lot of stuff in the background around, bot accounts and all these sort of things that they're utilising, and they've found people from Margaret to help them with the campaign to use that stuff to their advantage. I think, where we've come from, which was, with Daniel Andrews, it was a bit like Collingwood, right? He was very much driving this thing of you're with us or you're against us, right? Collingwood,
Yes.
it was a conscious thing with the Magpies. They were like, I think it was Eddie Wilder over it. It was like, you're with us or you're against us, right? And we don't care if you hate us, because if you're one of us, you love us, right?
Mm.
And Daniel Andrews was very much like that. He very much drove that that animosity, because and it was a political strategy of his. Now, what it's led to is this kind of heating up of the exchange in public debate. He then passed it off to Jacinda Allen, who was she was there for the whole time of that he was premier, and of course was the infrastructure minister there for a long time. And interestingly, in a press conference when she resigned, she touched on this was one interesting point. It's not necessarily patting her on the back, but it was just an interesting point that she saw the start of the metro tunnel. That was their thing, that they got to power, announced it, rolled it out, and finished it all within her time there. It's not often someone has a long enough term where they can actually see through a project from inception to completion. And I just thought that was interesting. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
She touched on that, saying, that's not often you get to kind of roll out a project, and it's not the other mob that get to announce it, even though you rolled it out, or vice versa.
Mm.
But she was there for the whole time. But she picked up that that role of of kind of playing that us versus them game. And she was very
Yeah.
dismissive of any criticism, and and she was not well liked by many people in the community. Now, some of that was unfair. Like, I think she picked up a
Mm.
lot of that. It wasn't against her personally. It was maybe against Dan Andrews, and they were just carrying over to her. There might have been some misogyny involved there. Like, I think, don't necessarily play into the fact that any criticism of a female leader is misogynist attitudes at play. But that you can absolutely see that was the case at certain times. And now they've gone and stuck someone in who is an absolute robot and just does not have the charisma to save the furniture, which is why they brought him in. And the way I've described it to people, we've now got a social influencer in Jess Wilson versus a robot in Ben Carroll. So, it remains to be seen whether Jess Wilson can actually manage a team, but also manage a huge network of people that is running a state government, right? Like that, she can stand next to a pothole and make an engaging video, but it remains to be seen whether she can actually, manage an economy and like just running the Liberal Party or the Liberal National Coalition in Victoria has proven too difficult for most of her recent predecessors. So, and she's been no exception to that. We've seen all this more redeeming stuff happen under her watch as well. Interestingly, I saw a video of her today, I believe, and it was put out by the Liberal Party. It was her just in the streets going business to business, which they've done a lot of these, but this one was kind of elongated and I get that. I actually was impressed with her demeanor out in the park. I think she's kind of, you see this where people have been around for a while, they start to grow into the role, and she was engaging, and she was, obviously they cut out all the ones where someone's yelling at her from a distance, but she was actually, she had a genuine tone to her voice. She was, she was carrying herself well, and I was like, okay, this is the first time where I've seen her not be kind of the salesperson. She was quite engaging. So it's a fascinating race. And of course, we've touched on this, but in the last couple of days, it's been sparsely reported in the media, and I don't understand why, but they've dropped a bomb on this state election in the last couple of days, and they've brought in these laws that abolish the group voting ticket. Now, to explain this to people who don't understand the group voting ticket, we've got to kind of go back and pick the most high-profile beneficiary of this system, which was Ricky Muir from the Motoring Enthusiast Party many years ago. Now, that was at a federal level, obviously, but he got in with a very small number of votes, and off the back of the work of Glenn Drury, who is a person they call the preference whisperer, and he's been doing it for a few decades. Now, Victoria was the last state to abolish this sort of system. Now, when you go to vote at a federal level, you have to do, 1 to 6 above the line or 1 to 12 below the line in the upper house. Whereas once upon a time, you could just do a 1 and someone else would sort out your preferences. So up
Yeah.
until a couple of days ago, this election was heading to the same system where the preference whisperer was working the deals in the background, and we had a system where the people weren't necessarily choosing where their preference went. If you just chose to do one number, God only knows where your where your vote was going to end up.
Yeah, because
Hence
it's sort
why
of like
this free Palestine things are popping up.
yeah, because of the part, because I mean, it used to be like this across the whole country. Every single state and territory and the federal level had group voting tickets for their upper houses, and it was really undemocratic in that if you selected, number one, everybody deserves a puppy party. That's awesome because you want a puppy. You're voting where your values and I guess you could say your self interest lies if you're a dog person. But it meant that the people behind the Everybody Deserves a Puppy party would then make deals with all the
Mm,
other parties as to where their preferences would go if the Everybody Wants a Puppy party gets knocked out of the running and their people don't get elected. So they might direct their preferences to the Everybody Deserves Two Kittens party,
mm,
which is obviously where all the cat people would vote. And if that party got knocked out, then their preferences would go to somebody else, and then somebody else, and then somebody else as you go on. And you might end up where your preferences end up with the nobody deserves a pet.
mm.
Everybody, everybody should, just be a capitalist sort of cog in the wheel for big business party,
Yep.
and that's who ends up getting elected. And that is, worlds away from your intention when you cast your
Mm,
vote. And yeah, so it's interesting, and so you would end up where people like Ricky Muir, and I have a soft spot for Ricky Muir because I do think he was an accidental um, uh, diamond in the rough in terms of democracy because he was genuinely
mm.
somebody of the people, but his entry into parliament was purely by accident and on an incredibly tiny percentage of the vote.
Yeah. Well, not
And
and not necessarily purely by accident because this is the design of the system, right? So
mm,
how it works in practice is someone like Glenn Drury, for instance, would will go to a number of minor parties and they'll be asked to run candidates in the case of Victoria, we've got 8 regions in our upper house, and each region will elect 5 representatives to sit in the upper house. So in so in practice, what they would say is, okay, you weren't going to run someone in, for instance, the southeast. You were only going to run someone in the north. We need you to run someone in the southeast, but we want you to all of the people that are running these candidates in this voting block that are running in the southeast. You're all going to direct your votes to minor party A, right? And then you might go over to the west. The region known as the west. They'll be told over there, okay, everyone is going to run a candidate. Everyone in this voting block is going to run a candidate, but you're all going to direct your preferences to vote to minor party B. And then in the north, they'll say, okay, minor party C gets everyone's preferences. And so, whilst it's only rarely successful that I wouldn't say rarely, but it doesn't, it's not like they get their way in every single electorate.
mm,
And usually they're fighting over that sort of 5th seat in each region. So, but they have success, right? So, Animal Justice, Legalized Cannabis Party, for instance, one of the minor parties represented in my region of the
mhm.
southeast, and of course we've got Libertarians who used to be the Liberal Democrats, David Limbrick. They've also got a spot. So, we've got 2 of these minor parties represented in our region, which is fascinating. So but yeah, that's the way it's directed behind the scenes. And it's now, I want to be clear, I don't like that system, right? So it's not a great system.
Mm.
However, I didn't want to see it abolished 2 days ago, right? So we talk about nuance a lot. This is where the nuance comes in.
Okay.
Getting rid of the group voting ticket system here in Victoria is fantastic, but it needed to be done in conjunction with an abolishment of the regions. So what we should have got. So
Oh.
and now what we should have done is said, okay, we're going to get rid of that, but what we're going to do is just have one, is just
Gigantic
have
electorate.
just have one pool for all of Victoria,
Yeah.
because what you get is, you need, and my maths won't do me too well here, but you need, say, 13, 14, 15% of the vote to get in to one of these regions, right? Because
Yeah. So the quota's
there are
still
only
quite
five
high.
spots available.
Yeah.
Um, because there are 40 spots available statewide, you can get in with 2 or 3% of the vote, right?
Yeah.
So you will by nature have a greater representation of minor parties, independents, the little guys, which of course is where a third of the country are placing their vote, or a third of the state now, based on the
Mm.
numbers, are actually placing their vote, and they don't make up a third of the seats. Now, the issue with getting rid of the regions, that has to be done via a referendum here in Victoria. So what the way it was described to me, and I got on board this pretty early on, was what we needed to do was say, hey, vote to change the group voting ticket system, but don't do it before the election. Agree to do it after the election, and bring it in, hold a referendum to change the regions to one big pool. So that hasn't happened. They've changed the group voting tickets. So
Oh.
what you have now got in Victoria is an election where the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, the National Party, and One Nation will romp to success in just about every region across Victoria, right? Because they will reach those numbers on their own. So you'll get, for instance, in some regions you'll get 2 Labor, a Liberal, a One Nation, and you may get a minor party, but
Mm.
it's doubtful. You might only get 1 or 2 or 3 across the whole state. So you might end up now with 2. You'll either end up with 2 Libs, 2 Labor, and a One Nation. You may even, if this protest vote does eventuate, you may end up with 1 Labor, 2 Libs, 2 One Nation, or 2 Labor, 1 Lib, 2 One Nation, whatever the case may be. But it has, and then obviously regionally, where you'll see more of the National and One Nation, and we'll see how they pinch each other's votes. But it has made it just even. So it's ruined Glenn Drury's business model, the preference whisperer, and he's come out and said that he said they've finally caught up. They've finally caught me. It's taken him a long time, but he's
Yeah.
finally he can finally hang up his boots because he's not required. And look, I didn't like what he was doing, but it was sort of the only way we saw minor parties getting in. So it was through necessity, right? And you got to respect him because he was successful, and he was a very good salesman and very good at doing what he was doing, and a good coordinator of all the minor parties to get them all on board. It's just horrible that system was going on. It should be in the hands of the people. What they've done, though, is just again feather the nest for the major parties, and made it all that harder. We spoke about it before when they raised the bar for how many members you need to become a registered party. This is we've got all the funding changes to the legislation, the electoral funding changes that were brought in federally last year. I think they were brought in just before the election and took effect just after the federal election. That again, they made it much harder for the community independents, or the Teals, as some people have called them, or many people have called them. It was very much around protecting incumbents, but protecting the major parties, because they've seen that year after year the vote for major parties has been declining, and they're now just trying to do whatever they can to protect what they've got left, rather than governing for the people and making themselves an attractive proposition. They just rig the game in their favour, and that's in essence what we've got in Victoria now, and it drives me to insanity. So even if we get registered, we'll do our best, but we've got such a harder road to victory now, or to getting a seat anywhere in Victoria, because instead of being, and look, we weren't buying into the preference whisperers games, like we were kind of staying out of that one, so it was already going to be difficult anyway. But now that this system's in, without abolishing the regions, it's almost impossible for us to get in. And we'll still we're still obviously hoping to get there. We still want to put ourselves on the ballot. It just makes it so much harder, and I just wish that the media were paying more attention to this, because it's a huge change, and they haven't looked at, they're just seeing it as, oh, what a great thing, we got rid of the group voting there. So yeah, but there was not the second step. We needed the second
Yeah.
step. They've done the first one. No commitment to do the second step, and that's what we need. And I hope there's a bit of pressure. We'll be putting pressure on them, and I hope there's a bit of pressure to make that happen.
Yeah, because I have to say, when you said that you opposed the change of the group voting ticket, you really took me back because I was like, hang on a second.
Yeah,
But no,
yeah,
that makes perfect sense now because
yeah. There's always a
um,
but. I oppose it, but
yes, I should have had greater faith in you. I do apologise, but because it's what we did in WA. So I think, and this might be a walk of shame because I have not fact checked myself, but if memory serves, we held a referendum in the 2021 said election in WA to change the constitution and remove the regions in the WA upper house,
mm-hmm.
and then once that was done, they abolished the group voting tickets in the WA upper house. And so in the 2025 election, WA was one single gigantic electorate for the upper house, and I think we had 37 people elected to that. And in that election, and keeping in mind that the 2021 election was an absolute crushing landslide victory on the part of Mark McGowan.
Mm.
So the upper house leading up to the 2025 state election was probably like 90% Labor
Yeah.
after the 2021 election. But post 2025, we have had some minor parties elected to the upper house. And the upper house is, I think, a little bit more representative of the electorate and the demography of the electorate. So it is really unfortunate that that's not happened in Victoria because, again, and if they were serious about this, they would hold the referendum at your state election because you already got like everyone's already
Yeah.
coming out to vote.
That's
The
right.
referendum is just one more bit of paper to fill out.
Yeah, and look, or an alternative. Like if you've got an alternative model that might work, raise it. But
Yeah.
they're fixated on winning the election, and they don't. Yeah, they're not going to like. They don't have a dog in the fight, right? Like this is
Well, it doesn't
why they're
benefit
going to
them.
go out of their way to fix a system that favours them.
Yeah.
And so
And
if you look at it now, we're basically we're at 3/3 now, right? So Labor, and depending on where you are in the electoral cycle is where it sits. But effectively, you've got Labor attract about a third of the vote. This is federally, state. It's gonna vary from state to state, but federally, you've got a third of the people are going to vote for Labor, a third of the people are going to vote for the coalition, Liberal National, whatever variant in whichever state, and then a third of the people are voting for Greens, community independents, minor parties, One Nation, etc. The other, a broad other column. Now, with those numbers in mind, you would expect that a third of the seats in any upper house would be, representative of that. So you'd say, okay, well, yep, you should have, a third of Labor, a third of the coalition. Now, obviously, that'll, Labor have smashed them in the lower house, so you'd expect them to have more upper house seats as well, which was the case. But with that, now that we've I think it's even ticked over a third now of people that vote other, you should really have a system where, 33-ish% of the sitting members in the upper house are in that other column. And I'd have to run the numbers, but I don't think we're anywhere near. We're not anywhere near that. And certainly in Victoria, we're not. We might be lucky to have. I mean, if you include One Nation in the other column, we might get like 25%, 20%, 25%, something like that. We're not getting anywhere near 33% under these new rules, and that is anti-democratic in by the numbers. Mathematically, it's anti-democratic. I would say that philosophically and any other way, it is as well. But this is what happens when the only time you ever get the majors to agree is when it's those two colluding to rig the system in their favour, and it happens time and time again. This is just the latest example, and we can shout from the sidelines. It's we just got to hope that fewer and fewer people vote for the major parties and One Nation for that matter, and that we get greater representation from minor parties and independents, that they can get in there and actually get some clout to make some changes to the electoral process, so that we can actually have some good outcomes here. Because it's certainly, I don't believe, I'm a minor party voter and an independent voter in different elections, and so therefore, I'm biased, and I'm going to say, yeah, I want a system that rewards, or finds a place for other, other parties or independents rather than major parties, and that we're just not seeing that enough. And that's it's a blight on our system. We've got a great AEC and VEC, but it's not their fault. It's the
Mm.
people in power that make the rules, and they're certainly putting it in their favour.
No, and it's tough because, and again, coming back to the perfect storm that is Victoria at the moment, I mean, the Labor Party, which is in government at the moment, is literally fighting for its life. So it's not going to do anything to upset that particular apple cart because it's already sort of up against it a bit. The Liberal Party are also fighting for their lives in a different context. And so they're trying to unseat a deeply unpopular aging government. And at the same time, they're fighting for their lives against the rise of One Nation.
Mm.
So you can understand the incentives for them in doing everything that they can to shore up power and shore up the certainty that their people will be returned and not a bunch of other insurgents, under the guise of the Australian Democrats or Independents or the Greens or other minor parties. Um, but also, it's also the terrible arithmetic of our electoral system because we have single representative electorates in lower houses. Your percentage of vote is not necessarily reflected in the number of seats that you pick up.
Yeah.
And this has been going on for probably a century where,
Mm.
for example, the Greens usually get about 12% of the vote nationwide, and up until recently had maybe one lower house seat if they were lucky.
Mm. Yep.
And that they currently do at the moment. Whereas the Nationals would get about 6 or 7% of the vote, but would have 30 or 40
That's right.
seats, because it does depend very much on where your vote gets
That's right.
sort of,
Yeah.
because the Greens vote tends to be very thin and very spread out, whereas the
Yeah.
Nationals vote would be concentrated in certain rural electorates because again
Mm.
that was their demographic. So
Which just
it's
highlights
tough.
the importance of that upper house,
Oh,
and
gotcha.
having it functioning correctly. That
Yeah.
the upper house seats more accurately represents the sort of first preference vote of the Greens, if we use them
Mm.
as an example, and Nationals
Yeah.
as well. That it's
Yeah.
they end up with probably they may be still slightly overrepresented in that because of the preferences between Libs and Nats, but there is that. That's the importance of having the upper house structured correctly, that you still get rewarded for not being targeted or not being geographically condensed in certain areas,
Mm.
and that's the importance of it. I don't know if have I told I don't know if you and I have discussed this. I've got my conspiracy theory. I put my tinfoil hat on. So
Just like to point out, this is Heath's conspiracy theory. This is not a
no, you'll
conspiracy
love it.
theory endorsed by the
You'll love
Australian
it.
Democrats.
And I've had this for a few months, and it's yet I'm yet to see this kind of. I'm yet to be convinced that it's not the case, right? And that is so. I reckon Labor are going to do whatever they can without completely bastardizing themselves, right? But they're going to make a whole lot of decisions. They're going to, set legislation. They're going to make announcements. They're going to govern in a certain way that is going to make it fertile ground for One Nation to pick up popularity at the expense of the coalition, right? I think
Oh.
Labor will look at it and say, okay, if we look down the path a little bit, we can either continue to fight the coalition, which we've done for decades and decades, for generations, and we just sort of switch from one to the other. We'll have a go for a couple of terms, and they'll have a go for a couple of terms, and we swap it back or we swap it back. What's changed lately with the demise, significant demise, and the capitulation of the coalition federally, we've now got a situation where they're really on their knees, and One Nation are taking over. Now, I reckon Labor will look at it and go, okay, do we kind of fight One Nation and like cut them off at the knees and give the coalition a chance, or do we let One Nation finish the coalition off? Because we know that in 10 years' time, we've got an absolute great chance of beating One Nation every single time, right? Like One Nation, we talk about the ceiling of One Nation, which that doesn't maybe it does exist for the coalition now. Historically, it hasn't, because they've always been able to pick themselves back up off the canvas, and I don't know if that's going to happen this time. So I reckon the Labor Party are going to look at it and go, okay, I reckon we can take One Nation. So let's let this play out, and let's feed the beast a little bit, so that One Nation like completely wipe out the coalition in a whole lot of seats and in the upper house, because we're confident that we'd rather fight One Nation than the coalition any day. And so I reckon, just if you just look at some of the things they're doing, it's poking the bear, right? Like it's activating the haters, and it's, they really want to get these protest voters out and about for One Nation. And they'll say, they'll come out and they'll sort of, this faux alarm around One Nation's numbers. They'll be loving it, because it's not going to impact their numbers all that greatly. It is absolutely going to slash and burn the coalition's votes. But you watch. I reckon at some point it'll come out. There'll be one of those. There'll be Nemesis or whatever that, the docos that they do on ABC whenever there's an end of term. They'll come out and say, yeah, no, we were quite happy to let One Nation do this. Yeah,
it's fascinating, and I don't think it's a conspiracy theory so much as a really interesting analysis of what's happening, because I have heard.
Well, that's as extreme as my conspiracy theories are going to get, right? Like, I'm sorry, I'm not a full cooker, but that's about as extreme as I'll be getting.
Yeah, this is as close as the Australian Democrats get to conspiracy theories, which is, well, this is a very interesting analysis of all the evidence that's currently before our eyes. But no, it's because I've had seen people who are much better informed and probably much smarter than me at this say, not quite that theory in particular, but they have alluded to the fact that if Victoria does fall to One Nation, so neither the coalition nor the Labor Party get up, and One Nation somehow forms government in Victoria, the federal Labor Party aren't going to be super upset by that, because it's going to kind of, 2028 is pretty much guaranteed for them anyway, based on the current Liberal Party performance.
Yeah.
But if One Nation takes Victoria and then proceeds to govern very, very badly for the next 2 years,
absolutely,
Albanese will simply increase his majority at the federal election. And therefore, and because, he is talking about Labor being the natural party of government, it will cement their hold on government federally, and probably also shore up the hold on government in all the other states where Labor is currently in government, so WA, SA, New South Wales, because poor Victoria and the poor denizens of Victoria will be the tragic sacrifice of this, because you're going to have to put up with a One Nation government for 4 years.
Well, yeah, we will be the canary in the coal mine in that, or more like a sacrificial lamb. I think is more the case, because and to be frank, like this, the latest polling that came out, some of the polling that came out about a week ago, one of the more likely scenarios here is that we end up with a liberal national government that can only form a majority with the assistance of One Nation, with the seats that they get from One Nation. So again, like, that's relying on One Nation picking up lower house seats, which remains to be seen. But this is an absolute live possibility. Now, the crazy thing, well, I don't know if it's crazy. I guess they can't, right? But the coalition are coming out saying, no, we're not going to do a deal with One Nation. I mean, they absolutely are, right? They're not going to send us back to another election, and they're not going to get supply from, like, it's not like they're going to get the backing of whoever else. Like, they're going to do whatever deal they need to not be in opposition for a 13th year, for a fourth term. So and also, that's the way they're backing themselves into a corner, but it's absolutely going to happen. But yeah, this is a live possibility, Elana, that One Nation will have a seat at the table.
And just to scare you a little bit further, Heath, depending on how many seats the Libs, the Nats, and One Nation win, One Nation could be the senior partner in that coalition.
I mean, all
it's possible.
There's a great podcast. I think the two Barrys or something. The two Barrys, Tony Barry and Barry Cassidy. Speaking of Redbridge, as he did before, but I think Barry Cassidy was saying on that one, like every possibility is live. Like we a Labor majority, Labor minority, coalition majority, coalition minority. Like
Mm.
we've, you could just about, like it's a nightmare to pick how this one's going to unfold.
Yeah.
Sometimes as we've seen with polling, sometimes it exaggerates sentiment, and it doesn't eventuate. So maybe you say, okay, it's still going to be a 2-horse race, and
Mm.
Labor are absolutely on the nose. And had they had an attractive proposition to turn to after Jacinda Allen, they could not just have saved the furniture, they could absolutely have won a majority again, because of the incompetence, or the perceived incompetence of the coalition when it comes to their internal dealings, and then being able to run a state. Uh,
Yeah.
However, yeah, I like, it's very hard to discount anything. I still
Mm.
can't see One Nation doing it on their own, but absolutely
No.
we'll see. Like every possibility is on the table here. I just think it's silly to be going out there now saying, well, we're not going to do a deal. We're not going to rely on them. We're going to win it on our own.
Mm.
Now that's aspirational, but if when your feet hit the ground, in the real world, you're going to say, well, yeah, the odds are we're going to need these guys to some degree, and if not them, who? Like,
Mm.
okay, what are you doing to improve your relationship with other miners? Like, you're still,
Mm.
this is a crazy one to pluck out, but the other day they came out with a thing saying we're going to make it so it's not mandatory for councils to have a glass bin, a little purple bin for glass. This is the coalition who have said they're all about small business and all the rest of it for years. You go and speak to any small business that deals in the recycling space, from
Mm.
green, green waste, your FOGO bin, through to cardboard recyclers. When glass smashes and gets into that stuff, it's a nightmare, right? And it costs them
Yeah.
money. It's not just a pain; it costs them money. So this is like just a little throwaway line they've run with, saying, "Oh, we're just going to do this," and it's like, so straight away you do that. When you do that stuff, just this kind of these little thought bubbles. It's like, yeah, but straight away you're going to upset a group of people, right? Like, why aren't you
Mm.
talking with people and coming up with meaningful stuff that's actually going to get the support of others in the house, or
Yeah.
prospective house members that are actually going to back you if it gets really tight and they've got to make a decision, like we saw in 2013 with Gillard,
Mm.
and the crossbenchers there. Why wouldn't they be doing some work there rather than just saying, "Oh no, we're not going to deal with One Nation"? We'll start
Yeah.
tilling the soil a little bit on the other side.
Yeah, because it comes back to the whole, because one of the things that has contributed to the demise of the Liberals is that they've taken the easy way out in conducting perpetual culture wars and environmentalism and recycling, and that as part of that, um, as opposed to actually doing the hard yards of in-depth policy work
Yeah.
and coming up with stuff that aligns with their values and is a vision and a
Mm.
proposition for the future. And I think you are completely correct that if the worst comes to the worst and the coalition in Victoria need the support of One Nation to form a minority government or a power sharing government, of course they're going to do a deal. And it's
Yeah.
not just the fact that they'll do anything to step into government. It is also the fact that if they knock that back and they refuse to do a deal, they're giving the middle finger to probably a third of the electorate who put One Nation in there,
Mm.
and they're going against the wishes of the community and the wishes of the electorate. And if you were forced back to a second election, that will blow back on them in the worst way. So yeah, it is a genuine dilemma, because on the one hand, they'll probably hate it. They'll do it through gritted
Mm.
teeth,
Oh,
but
they don't
and
want
and
to
it but
do
it
it.
won't. Oh God, no!
No,
But
but that's irrelevant. Like, you
yeah,
don't get what you want, right? Like, whether you want to do it or not, there's a very good chance that to form government, you're going to do that. And are they do we really? Does anyone expect them to turn their back on government because they've said that they're not going to do a deal with One Nation? Like, when they
yeah,
align on so many policies, do we
yes,
really think they're going to say, "Oh no"? They'll give them a handful. They'll give them 3 cabinet positions. They'll give them a whole lot of. They'll do deals on policy direction and things like that. There will be some key pieces of legislation they'll let them have input on. they're going to do the deal, right? Like, don't
Mm,
treat the electorate like a bunch of fools. It
yeah.
just be upfront and say, look, that's not what we want to do. But look, we're, you know, yeah,
Especially like, especially when you've been galloping after One Nation off to the far right and
mm,
matching them on their policies. I mean, in Tasmania, I don't know if it was the last Tasmanian election or the one before, but the Labor Party actually refused to form government. They and the because
mm,
they nobody got a majority, and the Liberal Party were left to sort of cobble together a coalition to get the
yeah.
the governor's assent and form government, but it was not pretty. So stranger things have happened in Australian politics. I
But
can't
that's where
see them. Yeah,
negotiation comes in, right? So
yeah.
on the recommendation of our national president Leonie Green, I have started. My wife and I started watching Borgen, which is a
Oh, is it Danish? Yeah.
pretty sure it's Danish political drama. It's 10 or 15 years old now. But it's interesting over there, which, if you think we look over there, and, we look at different parts of Europe and, including Scandinavia and all these different parts, and we go, okay, well, whenever there's something that we say, oh, it works over there, whether it's the gas tax in Norway or whatever the case may be, they say, oh, they always do it well over there. When you look at the dynamic over there with the number of minor parties, and I think Germany's the same, where they have
Mm.
to form ad hoc coalitions just about every election, right? They have to,
Mm.
once the election's done, they then go and sit in a room and go, okay, well, who can we join with? And the early part of this Borgen show is all about that, right? But it just goes to show that, like, yeah, and they will, people will kind of draw a line in the sand. No, I'm not. I'll not, I'll forego my seat at the table because I'm not willing to do this. But
Yeah.
um, that they manage to get there and still get good outcomes over there. And it's like, even
Mm.
with the majors, like, who don't have to do that after every election, and arguably when we did in the hung parliament federally in 2013,
Mm.
Julia Gillard passed more pieces of legislation, I think, than any other term in federal parliament ever.
Mm.
And it wasn't easy, but the art of negotiate, she mastered the art of negotiation, which Tony Abbott evidently was unable to master,
Yeah.
unsurprisingly. And it led to, better outcome, mostly better outcomes,
Mm.
where they were actually able to pass legislation. Whereas, what we're seeing now is they're just, it's they're almost refusing to bargain, and we know they're going to, but it's just all
Mm.
this posturing in the lead up too. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
And I mean, a minority or power sharing government, as some people prefer to call it, is by no means a bad thing. I think having that diversity of voices, being forced to, put forward the argument for whatever piece of legislation you want to pass and negotiate on each piece and get the support of the parliament to get it through the parliament is incredibly valuable. And people deride the Gillard government, but as you said, it was incredibly successful.
mm,
A lot of really good things came out of that government, not least the NDIS and other things. Um, so there is something to be said for having a diversity of voices in government. You know, uh, hashing it out on each
mm,
issue. Um, it's just that with the rise of One Nation and their track record in not being the um, how can I put this? The most cohesive
mm,
parliamentary group, um, and in their 30 odd year history, it does add a frisson of, I think, risk and
yeah,
unpredictability to
oh,
government. And in this day
yeah,
and age, this is probably like, people are desperate for stability and desperate for competence in government. And
mm-hmm,
I think the fact that the Labor Party had to put up Ben Carroll, who I'm sure is a very nice man, but judging from afar, he looks like the amalgamation of, I think, the last four prime ministers in terms of the way he looks and,
yeah.
and his invisibleness. Um,
Oh,
and
he's so staged and cautious and um, like, gives you nothing, like,
yeah,
just he just
faceless man
stands
from
there
Central Casting.
steadfast, gives you nothing.
Yeah.
Just going back to your point around things that they can agree on, I think because we're probably running out of, well, we probably ran
Mm.
out of time long ago, but you and I can't help ourselves. The
We are talkers.
we but it's important. I guess I'll preface this by saying that one of the proud things about our party that we all hold dear is that every vote is a conscience vote, right? That there is no
Mm.
towing the party line with the Australian Democrats. And were that the case with the major parties and all parties across the spectrum and in the parliament, we would have seen significant change to the way that we deal with gambling advertising and gambling in general in this country. But of
Yes.
course, because there is the need for MPs of the major parties, particularly Labor at this point in time, but the coalition can't escape this, because there is the need to toe the party line based on the influence that whether that's financial or lobbying or whatever the case may be, we're in a situation where the latest figures being run by the Community Independence now is like 90% of people in Australia want to see an end to gambling advertising in Australia, and they are still fluffing around with it in Parliament. And as of this evening, I think like there's a Senate hearing. They are doing whatever they can to not do this. And we look, as you know, like you and I have spoken about this ad nauseum on this podcast in the past, because the Dunkley by-election, which of course I ran in, 2.5 years ago or something.
Mm.
Um, we like this this issue. It's close to my heart because of where I live. Peter Murphy being
Mm.
our local member when she released the Murphy report, and also just like going into like this is just a no brainer, and it just drives me insane that we're still in this situation where they're not doing anything about it. And I suppose because of the Australian Democrats, because we are um, by our nature, and we've proven this over a long period of time, it's all around we want to stop that inappropriate influence, right? We
Yeah.
want the checks and balances to make sure that decisions are made for the right reasons without the influence of people who shouldn't be having a seat at the table. Now, this one is as clear as day.
Mm.
This is directing policy off the back of mainly donations from the likes of Sportsbet, TAB, Tabcorp, and the others. So, one example was a couple of years ago when Albanese kicked the can down the road in relation to making changes prior to the federal election. Um, it came out that a week prior to that announcement, Sportsbet donated 88 grand to Labor and about the same amount of money to both to a combination of the Liberal and National Party. It was like 60 grand and 20 grand or whatever.
Mm.
And and then a week later they say, oh, we're not doing anything till after the election. Now we're 2 years late. I think we're 2 years
Mm.
down the track from that point, and we're
Yeah.
still not seeing, and it's gone up like it used to. I think Dunkley, when the Dunkley by-election, I think at that point it was $25 billion a year we were losing as Australians, and I think 7 billion in Victoria, where some of the figures, it's like 34%, $34 billion now we're losing.
Mm.
Zoe McKenzie, who's the federal member for Flinders down in the Mornington Peninsula, was rattling off how much they lose on the peninsula. And I'll have to find it and share it. It was staggering, the daily losses just on the Mornington Peninsula to gambling. And you think, God, how far? It was like 250 grand a day or something like that.
Mm.
And that was I think that was even just pokies, for God's sake. Like,
Yeah.
that's even before you get into the betting agencies. The harm that's being done, and like, good on, we speak about David Pocock, Monique Ryan, Zali Stegel and Allegra Spender and their new party, but and the others here, like, this is just an obscene ignore evidence, an obscene example of Parliament ignoring the wishes of the general public and the electorate, and it's
Mm.
just mind-boggling that we're still in this position.
But and also they're ignoring the evidence. I mean, it's not like we don't know, right? Because we have the Murphy report telling us point blank what the problem is.
Yep.
It had something like 30 odd recommendations on how to solve the problem. And this was a Labor instigated and Labor led investigation. And it's literally Peter Murphy's legacy in that she died 6 months after delivering that report. So she spent the last, probably
Mm-hmm.
last few years of her life on this issue, working toward
Mm.
this. And it's what frustrates me about this whole thing, apart from all the excellent points that you just laid out, is the simple fact that Albanese is choosing to ignore the evidence laid out by his own party member and his own party, and he's doing everything in his power to either delay or deflect from actually doing what Peter Murphy recommended.
Yeah.
And it was a bipartisan set of recommendations, so that all the different parties involved in that Senate inquiry um, agreed with the recommendations, so that there's been no dissent. Um, and they're still they're sort of turning themselves inside out to try and go, well, yes, we have this, this really clear blueprint on how to deal with this scourge on our society. But instead, we're going to ignore that, and we're going to put all these other thingies in place, all this sort of window
Mm.
dressing around it, to avoid actually having to deal with the core problem.
Yeah.
That's what really gets up my nose. And
It's
for
terrible.
full transparency for our listeners, I've spent probably half my career in the gaming industry. So I worked for a casino. I've worked for an organisation that owns pubs and clubs across the eastern seaboard, and I'm currently working for a lottery. Um, so as a, I guess, a gaming insider, I'll tell you right now that everything that Peter Murphy laid out in her report is accurate, and all of the solutions that she laid out in that report
Mm.
will address the scourge of gambling in this country. And it's not to say that, and I should stress that at no point has her report recommended banning gambling, because gambling is legal,
That's right.
and it
As
is,
as it should be, right? Like
exactly, yeah,
you
yeah.
only drive it underground if you make it illegal.
Precisely. And, and look, a lot of people can have a flutter, be entertained, and leave it at that, and gamble within their means. And those people have the right to continue to do that. But what is terrifying is the tiny, tiny minority of people who are desperately negatively affected by this, for whom most of the losses in gambling come from.
It's
You
not
know,
even a tiny minority. Like, it's actually getting to the point now they've delayed this so long. It's no longer a teeny tiny minority of like
yeah.
it's actually the I hear stories. I was talking to someone through work the other day, and they with sort of young adult male children, and they all sit there watching the footy, and they've all got the thing in their hand. They're all talking about
Yes.
the multis and the first goal
Yeah.
scorer. Like, it's not about the footy anymore. Like there's the
Yeah. It's
about the game. Make it about the
Well,
game,
it's
not
all
the
about the
odds.
odds
Whatever.
and
So,
stuff, yeah.
but
It's really
it's
sickening that,
it's
like,
it's gone. Like, these people are
yeah,
all there's tons of them now.
they're
You know.
indoctrinated, and, like, yeah, like, and this is why that sort of the gambling advertising is not just so pernicious, but it's such a fire hose of advertising, and so even people who don't gamble are really, really annoyed by it, because they're sick of seeing all these gambling ads when they're watching the footy and watching the cricket and stuff. But the thing is, when it gets to a stage when, like, a 12-year-old child can't watch a football game and enjoy the spectacle on the screen, or in front of them on the field, without thinking about the odds and,
Mm.
the gambling aspect of it all, we have fundamentally failed as a society. Like, I think I was listening to a podcast during the week, and someone said that this is our gun control problem. So the United States is failing as a state, as because they cannot even begin to address the gun problems that they
Mm.
have over there. And for Australia, it's gambling,
Yeah.
the perniciousness of gambling, and the way it's embedded in almost every aspect of our society.
Mm.
And we have no political will to address it, because the vested interest is so powerful.
Yeah,
And it
and
just,
that's the like there is
yeah,
will, but it's just not the people who need to do that.
yeah,
And the
yeah,
coalition talk a big game here, but they like it's just as squarely on them. Like, this could
yeah.
change. Like, this could happen with the crossbench and the coalition. I reckon they could just about, and the Greens, and um, this could happen. It's being blocked by, and look, it's not just the betting agencies; it's the sporting codes. Your
Mm.
AFL, NRL, Cricket Australia, etc., who
It's the media
rely
companies
on,
as well.
yeah, and absolutely. So it's your your Rupert Murdoch's whether it's the Foxtels or the Herald Suns, but also the Seven West
Mm.
and Fairfax and Nine and all these guys who they make a lot of money out of, and
Yeah.
so there's pressure there. Now, I would argue when the average salary of an AFL footballer is something like 400 grand now, and you could probably shave 10% off that and be okay. We've sport still continued after cigarette advertising went by the wayside, right? Like,
Yeah.
and now the problem they've got is gambling is next on the list, but before too long it'll be alcohol. So they'll have to
Hmm.
do without alcohol sponsorship, because that'll be, once we finally cross this off the list, that people will come for alcohol.
Yeah.
The one that I think should be getting more traction is uh, unhealthy food for kids, right? Like,
Mm.
we've tinkered around the edges with what can be advertised and whatever, but there's still,
Yeah, like fast food
Milo.
advertising and stuff.
Every time you see a Milo ad, it's like, kids swinging a cricket bat, and it's like, you need this for energy, and Nutrigrain for Iron Men for years, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That'll be the next one that goes. So all of a sudden, if you get to the point where sports, your sports betting agencies can't advertise. You've already done without cigarette. If Carlton Draft and all these, and Forex Gold and that sort of thing can't advertise with them, then your Coca-Colas of the world can't do it. And then as BYD take over the world, your Toyotas will disappear. So Toyota and Hyundai and all these guys, they won't have the money to support. So you can see how they're, this is kind of the first one to go, and they're kind of going, well,
Mm.
God, once this happens, it's going to be like dominoes, because all our
Yeah.
revenue, all our big advertisers are going to fall by the wayside. So I get the alarm, but
Mm.
this has gone like, this is a public health thing. This is we've got people killing themselves on a regular basis. We've got people losing their homes, losing their loved ones, as in, the breakdown of relationships.
Mm.
We've got a domestic and family violence like epidemic in this country that we know. And I always say, I'm always careful to say that there's a difference between a reason and an excuse, right? Nothing excuses that violence, but there are reasons for it. And one of the known reasons for this occurring or being more prevalent is financial stress, and one of the key drivers of that is obviously people losing money to gambling harm. So it's well beyond it's well beyond a joke now, and I just, we'll see what happens. It's never got
Yeah.
more traction than what it is at the moment, and I just hope that in the next, hopefully, look, state election, obviously, as you rightfully educated me, that pokies is largely controlled at state level, whereas
Mm.
a lot of this sports betting stuff is at a federal level. So this is before we've got a state election. This is look, the pokies thing is just a blight on society, and we'll if we can get registered, and that'll certainly be part of our our manifesto as leading into the state election, is to tackle pokies as well. But
Yeah.
we just, it's just, it's so disheartening and crushing to see that we're still just not flicking the switch on this stuff. But there's optimism. I'm always optimistic that we'll get a good outcome in the end. It's just this is, I think, whatever legacy, we talk about Peter Murphy's legacy, and I had real issues with them talking about her legacy in the lead up to the Dunkley by-election, and then also the 2025 election, about continuing Peter Murphy's legacy when they just haven't. But we talk about legacies, and Anthony Albanese's legacy, while there might be some positives, I think his stubbornness and his reluctance to move on this will be a stain on his legacy, and I
Oh, yeah.
bloody well hope it is. Like, I hope
Yeah.
much like I hope Robodebt stays with the coalition for many decades to come,
Yeah.
because it was an abomination of public policy, and I really hope this, if this continues any longer, but even if it doesn't, the delay in dealing with this should stay with Albanese for a long, long time, as it well should, because this is, it's just not right. It's not right.
Yeah.
And anyway, hopefully we get there. But it remains to be seen. But hey,
Yeah.
in that we've been talking for God knows how long, I think we should
Yes.
probably wrap it up.
Yes, just before we wrap up, I just want to two super, super quick points. One is there has been sort of speculation, because the coalition, the Greens and the crossbench were kind of teaming up to force the Albanese government to amend the gambling legislation that they were putting forward. And there was speculation that the Albanese government would go, either you pass this as is, or we're going to yank it, and it's just not going to get passed at all. And it was sort of being framed as Albanese was doing that so that the coalition and the Greens and the others would take the blame for there being no action on gambling advertising. And I think that would have blown up in his face if he had done that, because in my mind, I would have blamed him because he was the one that yanked it. So it has, just in the past few days, I think it has sort of forced the government to begin engaging with the other parties in the Senate more constructively. So there's hope. But and I just want to say, like, again, from because WA perspective, we don't have pokies in my state. The only place you can go and play electronic gaming machines is at the casino. So they're
Yep.
sort of sequestered into one building. And I was listening to a podcast with Mark Kenny during the week, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But and I've forgotten the name of the professor or the expert that he was interviewing. But one of the arguments that the gambling companies put forward, and the NRL and the AFL put forward, is, if we ban gambling advertising and ban gambling sponsorship of sports, then all of the sort of development and feeder
Yeah.
programs of young
Grassroots.
kids,
Grassroots
grassroots stuff,
football.
yeah,
Yeah, I've heard
that
that one.
one, yeah, that
What a
they'll lose
joke.
funding and all that sort of stuff. And the expert on democracy sausage said, well, in WA, where there is no pokey, there are no pokies. There is, gambling isn't funding the grassroots sporting initiatives. They're actually better funded and more successful in WA than they are in the rest of the country.
Hmm.
So once again, evidence.
Yep.
Do not discount the evidence, people. There's
Yep.
a ton of it to
Uh,
support why gambling advertising should be banned. So, as we wrap up, Heath, and it has been and again, the Democrats as a collective, we are talkers. So, I think our regular listeners have sort of come to accept that by now. But we've had a lot to catch up on, and it's been wonderful to see you again. But in the lead up to the Victorian state election and the hopeful registration of the Australian Democrats as a party in Victoria, how can our listeners and our supporters support you guys?
So look, even though we've lodged all the lists with members on it to get us registered, we obviously just always want to welcome members in. So, as I said, I think because of the way it's all playing out in Victoria, we are gaining a lot of members because they're disenchanted and people are just searching for I think they're searching for that life buoy in the water to grab onto. So they can absolutely head to our website, vic.democrats.org.au is our state-specific website that we've set up that has a whole lot of our policies. We're developing a whole lot of state-specific policies, but there's obviously a huge suite on our national site that you can find there too of our policies. They just give you a general sense. I mean, they give you a lot of detail, but you also just get a general sense of what we're about. And if we do manage to somehow pull off this registration feat, then it's going to be crucial that people support us, whether that's donating to the party so we can get some collateral out there and get the flyers going and get some social media advertising and all the rest of it. And of course, they at the end of the day, it's all about voting for us too, so we can have electoral success. As I said, it's the mountain keeps sort of getting taller and taller as we stare at it, thanks to the group voting ticket changes. But and just share, like, wherever you can. Just if you see anything on social media, we've been really active and we're getting great traction. But sharing and liking that, you hear this on every single social media channel and podcast around. Like and subscribe and all the rest of it. We don't have Patreon and all the other stuff, but no, just wherever possible, just sharing our content and just having conversations. If you're having a conversation with someone, it might be about something punters politics said, or it might be something like gambling reform. It might be something that just someone yelling about how bad Albo is, or whatever it is. They just mention that there is someone that's there is a party that's having a crack at trying to address the root causes of all these issues and not just getting angry about it. We're actually trying to do something productive and do something meaningful about it. And Elana, I should mention we should create a bit of sizzle because around about this time next week, we have a couple of massive guests coming on this podcast. So I don't know whether I don't know. Maybe I will mention it. I don't know. But in the last little while, we've had some really good engagements with the GERC, who is doing wonderful work. I believe the GERC is a Victorian operating out of Victoria, maybe out of the Epping fruit and veg market, maybe. I don't know. But does some amazing work. And there is a little bit of a sort of a coalition of the willing that's developed between Frackman, Martin Bella, and I effing love Australia as well. That a whole lot of channels there that are getting together, and they've got their own podcast, obviously. But a couple of those, I was going to say those gentlemen, but I don't know what you call the Girk. A couple of those individuals have agreed to appear on our podcast next week. So Martin Bella and the Girk will be joining us on the pod, and that'll be sort of released towards the end of next week.
Mm.
And we're just really excited about that one because, they're doing amazing work. There's a sort of a centrist alliance, if you will, that's forming with a lot of those guys, and they're the traction they're getting on social media is great. And ultimately, you and I have said for a long time, we don't care who's pushing the barrow. If someone's out there advocating for the same stuff that the Australian Democrats have been banging on about for 49 years, then hey, power to them, and we'll do whatever we can to support them. We're not all about feathering our own nest here. It's just great to see others out there, and it's very hard to get traction. We always say it's very hard to break the algorithm when we're talking about sensibility and rationality. But it's good that there are people out there cutting through with that message. So
Yeah.
radically sensible, as I think might have been something you coined a little while ago. But it's really exciting to have those guys on the pod. So look out for that one in your feeds next week.
Yes, yes, because we are back. We're back with a vengeance. So we have a few other guests that we were hoping to get on after the Gherkin Martin Bella. And yeah, let's sort of keep the ball rolling in that. So, guys, if you're not in Victoria and you still want to help the Stony Democrats get registered in your state and hopefully vote for us either in the federal election or your upcoming state election, whenever that is, you can go to democrats.org.au to join the party and help us all out. And until then, we will we'll let you get on with your lives and hopefully see you in a week or so.
Thanks, Alana.
Thanks, Heath. Bye.